What you know, alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. It's Monday, August 25th. You guys will be getting this Tuesday, August 26th. I'm late getting this out because I sat with my Grammy for a few hours today, but let's knock out part two. We pick up after lunch and they talk about the fact that Charlie is 2.5 years older than Wendi. Back in 2013 to 2014, she said she really wasn't spending a lot of time with Charlie, but she did speak with him on a regular basis. He was single, dating a lot of people. He worked hard, played hard. He liked good food and nice cars. She says she's pretty sure they would talk about her marital problems in their phone conversations. Charlie didn't like Dan at the time, and he did joke about hiring a hitman. That's when he said that buying her a TV was cheaper than hiring a hitman. She may have told Jeff Lacasse, her boyfriend at the time, about that. She's asked if she remembers sending a text to someone in May of 2014 saying that her parents aren't into Jeff. She doesn't remember that. Now, as we know, the morning of the murder, she had that TV repair appointment with the Geek Squad because of what she says are vertical lines on the TV. She thought her kids may have tapped it. That appointment was between 8 and 12. And that was the same TV that Charlie joked he got her instead of hiring a hitman. Donna texted Wendi about the repair guy being on the way. Wendi said she didn't buy the TV, and she thinks the Geek Squad reached out to Donna first. The damage was not covered by the warranty, and she said the repair guy was there maybe an hour. She's asked if she was upset and crying when the TV repair guy was there. She doesn't think so. She doesn't remember being upset about the TV not being able to be repaired. The prosecution asks about an impact to the screen, and Wendi says yes. Now, Jeff Lacasse will probably testify that there was something that looked like a crater on that TV, and he said he doubted the kids did it because whatever hit that TV had to have been heavy, and he didn't think with how little they were, they would have been able to do that. She's asked if she went to dinner with Charlie after the murder, and this is where she vomited on the table. Wendi said that was a few weeks after the murder when she felt comfortable enough to leave her apartment. She's asked if Charlie referred to that as a celebratory dinner. Wendi said she's only heard that in other trials, but not from Charlie. She met Katie twice, and both times were just through Charlie. She said Katie was just somebody he dated, and she didn't think it was serious. She also points out that all of Charlie's girlfriends looked somewhat similar. They show this photo of Katie and Wendi at the beach with a friend of Katie's. Wendi said she stayed for about an hour, and this was over Father's Day weekend in 2014, so just about a month before the murder. And that photo was taken somewhere that was close to her parents' house. She said this was the second time she had met her. The first was at a dinner with her then boyfriend, Jeff, when she was running an alternative spring break in South Florida. Wendi says during this trip, there was no conversation about the murder with Katie, Donna, or Charlie. Shortly before the murder, Wendi went down to South Florida for Harvey's birthday. That was on July 5th, and she stayed for around 7 to 10 days before returning back to Tallahassee. Now, Donna and Harvey came up to Tallahassee to drive down with Wendi for this trip. The prosecution asks, was there any talk about relocation or anything of that nature? Wendi said it had been a year since all that resolved, and she didn't think so. She also denies there being any talk of the pending grandma motion where Dan was asking Donna only have supervised visits with the boys. They go back to the morning of the murder. She said the TV repairman came on the early side of the 8 to 12 window. But the prosecution asks, was Dan murdered between 8 and 12? Wendi says yes. She doesn't remember if she paid the TV repairman, but said it's possible. And she's asked if she's ever referred to the TV as a code word for murder. She says no. She's asked if Donna did. No. Her and Jeff broke up the week before Dan was murdered. She remembers seeing him on July 13th. She's asked if she remembers asking Jeff if she could tell him something in confidence, and Wendi doesn't remember. The prosecution asks if she told him if something happened to Dan, then she could move back to Miami. She says no. Then she's asked if she told Jeff in the summer of 2013 that Charlie had seriously explored options about relocation, including regarding hiring a hitman. Wendi says she did not have this conversation with Jeff. She's asked if 4 days before the murder, she sent Jeff an email. Wendi did and said she told him she just didn't want any contact with him. Prosecutor says, so you weren't breaking up, but you're asking to not have contact, and then you'll reach out later and figure something out. Wendi says she was breaking up with him, but she has an aversion to conflict, so that could have been her way to avoid it. She's asked about what time the TV repairman left, and Wendi thought it was around 10. After he left, she did some work around the house for a couple of hours, talked to some friends, ate breakfast, and left home close to noon to run a few errands. After the errands, she went to meet 2 friends that she would meet on Fridays for lunch. She went down Trescott Drive after she left her house. She said that's the route she used to take, but there was yellow tape up, so she made a 3-point turn and continued down another road. She's asked how far down Trescott she went until she turned around, and she said she got up to the roadblock. The night before Dan was killed, the kids were with him, and that morning he had taken them to preschool. The plan was for Wendi to pick them up that afternoon. She's asked if she had talked to her boys that morning, and she had not. And she also did not speak to Dan. They did have plans to talk. She says she called and he didn't pick up. When she got to the roadblock and saw that Trescott was blocked off, she said she did not try to call Dan or the daycare. After seeing that, she was on the phone at the time she came to the roadblock and may have told the other person that she needed to hold on while she did her 3-point turn. She says she wasn't concerned about the roadblock, and she doesn't remember if Dan was set to leave Friday or Saturday to go to New York. Prosecution says, let's look at your law enforcement interview. Wendi says he had plans to be out of town and that he was leaving on Saturday. Prosecutor asked if the killers knew he was going out of town, how would they know? She says, I don't know. And she doesn't know if Charlie knew Dan was leaving to go out of town. She said Donna usually knew their schedule as far as Wendi and the boys, and probably would have known Wendi would have been the one to have the boys that weekend, but not necessarily that Dan was leaving to go out of town. She's asked if Donna kept meticulous records of every time that Dan went out of town. In fact, she sent you a record that went back to 2010. Wendi said Donna never switched over to a Google Calendar, so she would keep that meticulous planner of everything. Prosecution brings up that Dan left Wendi a voicemail on the morning of his murder. He said he was going to the gym between 9:15 and 10:30. Wendi said they were trying to touch base about the children's schooling, so that's why he was so specific about when he would be at the gym. She did talk to Charlie at 9:30 a.m. that morning for 18 minutes, and she said they talked about the TV. She called to see if it made sense to repair it or just buy a new one. She can't say if she talked about Dan's travel plans to Charlie or not. She said at the time she had WhatsApp on her phone, and she would use it to talk to people who lived out of the country because it was free. Now, back at that time, it would have been very expensive to text somebody internationally on the phone. She doesn't know if she ever talked to Katie on WhatsApp. Back to her activities the day of the murder. After seeing the roadblock, she went to the liquor store. She had been invited to a Stock the Bar party, and they asked for a very specific kind of bourbon, so she asked the employee for help. It was Bullet Bourbon, and it was bought at 12:49 p.m. She may have gotten gas and then drove to lunch. After that, law enforcement came in and got her. Now, after the murder, she relocated to Miami. Wendi said she left Tallahassee after the funeral, but took a weekender for her and her boys, thinking that they would be back quickly. She came back a couple of times to get things and give a talk. The prosecutor points out that within 48 hours after the shooting, she was back in South Florida. Detective Isom called her while she was on her way back to Miami. Wendi said he maybe wanted to get some DNA from her kids. They were already halfway down the road and had been in the car for about 4 hours with the boys. Wendi says the call broke up and he did not call back to follow up. The prosecutor asked if she was faking the call breaking up, and she said no. Shortly after that, Wendi told Detective Isom he could contact her attorney. She says he never followed up. When asked if she was happy to be out of Tallahassee, she said no. So the prosecution asks about a January 1st, 2016 text that she sent someone. Wendi says that would be a year and a half later. It's not a question of being happy. It was me building a new life. And the prosecutor has her turn to a tab. Wendi says she doesn't know who she was talking to. Prosecutor says it's not a big deal, but did you say, I'm so happy I don't live there? And the person responds, I bet. It's a crap hole. Prosecutor says, would it surprise you that you were talking to your brother Charlie? Wendi says she doesn't know if it would surprise her. Did you change your children's name after Dan was killed? Wendi says about a year later. Prosecution, you changed their last name from Markel to what? And Wendi says mine. Adelson? Yes. And she also changed her oldest son's middle name. Prosecutor brings in an email dated July 3rd, 2014. Wendi looks at it and says it's an Evite for her dad's 70th birthday, and she doesn't know if she sent it to herself or if her mom sent it to her. She said she may have helped them with the Evite, and it was addressed to Wendi and the two boys. Prosecution points out this is before the murder. The state brings up an email where it is confirming that Lincoln will attend Tat Shabbat with Harvey, and they want to know who sent it. Was it Harvey? Wendi said it seems like somebody else, but she would also say that Lincoln will attend this event with his mom. It's awkward to say things in the third person, but it's not impossible. The subject on that email was Lincoln Adelson, and this is before the name change was done officially. Wendi said she was scared about putting the boys in school and was using the name Adelson socially for about a year before officially changing their last name. That started when she had to register the boys for school. She's asked if Donna helped her with registration. Wendi doesn't think so. But the prosecutor brings in an email about flag football, and the email is from Donna, and it says, we registered him as Ben Adelson. She's asked where Dan was buried, and he was in Toronto. She's asked if her and the boys attended, and they did not. When was the last time you spoke to your mother as we sit here today? Wendi kind of looks up at the ceiling and says November of 2023. That would have been the same month Charlie was convicted and Donna was arrested. She's asked if Donna has given her any information or advice on how to testify in this case. No. The prosecutor goes back to Charlie's trial. Did your mom offer you advice about testifying at his trial? And Wendi says yes. She was hoping Wendi would be supportive of her brother. And afterwards, Donna was devastated, and she did not feel Wendi was supportive of Charlie. Wendi says she wasn't involved in any way in the plot to kill Dan and has no knowledge of it happening. She didn't provide any information, even unknowingly, to assist in the murder. Regarding Donna's involvement, Wendi says she has no information to that. She knows Charlie said that about buying the TV. It was a tasteless joke, but the prosecutor points out someone did hire a hitman. She asked Wendi, was the part of the plot to kill Dan for you to have plausible deniability? Wendi again says she was not involved in any plot to kill Danny. Why did you tell investigator Isom in your law enforcement interview that you were worried in the police car on the way to be interviewed that you were worried you would be a suspect? She said Dan didn't have anything bad going on in his life other than divorce stuff, so it may make them think it could be her. Prosecutor says you mentioned 9 times in your interview something about being a suspect. Yes. When you were approached at the restaurant, you weren't yet told this is a shooting, only that something happened to your ex. Wendi says she doesn't even think that. She was worried at first it was something with the kids. She was told law enforcement officers were with the boys and she didn't know why. She said in the police car, they told her Dan had been shot. And the prosecution asked, you were told that prior to being in the interview room? She says yes. I could be mistaken, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but they tell her in the interview room, he's been shot, and then she starts crying. You allow law enforcement to take your computer? Wendi said she gave permission for everything she had to be helpful. She's asked if she told investigators she didn't think she was going back to work and just to take the laptop. Wendi said her life had just fallen apart. Did you suggest your parents may be angry enough to kill Dan? Wendi said, I suggested a lot of people, and the prosecution says, but some of the people were your parents? Yes. You said you didn't think they were capable of doing that. Did your mom have someone she could enlist to assist her? And Wendi says, I don't know. What was your first thought when you were asked if anyone would kill Dan for your benefit? She said at first she thought maybe a crazed friend or a former student. Prosecution said, that's not what you said first. You said Charlie. Wendi says, you have it there. Ms. Kappelman says, can you tell the jury you did say Charlie was one of those people? And Wendi says, I did. Did you say if someone tried to kill my ex, they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law? And Detective Isom asks, regardless of who it is, do you recall your answer? Wendi said, I was hoping it wasn't anyone in my family, and the idea of that gave me pause. Prosecution said, but that wasn't your answer, was it? Was your answer, it would be different if I thought it was my brother? Yes. Wendi says she did call her mom from the interview room. Did she advise that your dad was in the shower? Wendi doesn't remember. Did you ask her to sit down? Wendi said she did. She was concerned about Donna's age, and if she fell, she could hurt herself. Did she ask to put you on speaker? Why? Wendi says, so my dad could hear? Prosecution points out, wasn't dad in the shower? Wendi doesn't know. Was anyone else there? Maybe Charlie? Wendi doesn't think so. Did you ask your mom to tell Charlie what was going on? Yes. Your mom took the news pretty well, and Wendi said Donna was upset. Did you say something else? You said my mom handled that pretty well. Wendi said I may have said that, so has her look at the transcript, and Wendi says yes. Did you say, well, they sounded really surprised, so that's a relief? Wendi says yes. And that was it for direct. On cross, Donna's defense asked, when was the last time you listened to the call? And by the call, she is referring to the call Wendi made to Donna from the interview room at the law enforcement center to tell her Dan had been shot. Wendi says she's never watched it. She's read the transcript, though. You don't remember the shock in your mom's voice? And Wendi says yes. There was a photo of Katie and another lady at the beach with you on Father's Day weekend, 2014. And your testimony was you only knew Katie with Charlie. Was Charlie or your mom at the beach that day? No. You had a dinner with Charlie and Katie. Was it before or after the beach trip? Wendi said several months before. It was probably in March or April of that same year. So the dinner, that was the first place you met Katie? Wendi says, as far as I remember, yes, it was me, Charlie, Katie, and Jeff. They talk about when Wendi was young. Donna didn't work. She did go back to teaching after Wendi was in school. The defense points out all three kids got postgraduate degrees. Donna was a good mom. She was loving, caring. Yes. You once said she radiates positivity. She's completely selfless. Did you say that? Yes. Did you say your mom never did anything for herself? She invested in your lives? Wendi says that Donna was a very good mother and grandmother. Defense points out when Wendi had her kids, Donna came and spent time helping. When the baby cried in the middle of the night, Donna would get up so Wendi could rest. And Wendi agrees. Your mom's been there for you in small and big ways? Yes. After you left Dan in September of 2012 and into January of 2013, did Donna spend a lot of time there in Tallahassee helping you with the boys? Yes. Things like homework, bought groceries, she cooked, cleaned. Yes. The family dental practice was close to them when they were in Coral Springs. Wendi said they would work around Monday to Thursday and stay in Coral Springs during that time and then go to Miami some weekends, and Wendi would sometimes visit. She's asked when Donna would come up to help or visit with you and Dan, she would sometimes fly and she would sometimes drive, but mostly drive? Yes. Defense points out that's an 8-hour trip. And around that time, your mom would have been 64-ish? Yes. And they also point out Donna is now 75. Sometimes she would rent cars to drive, and sometimes Harvey would come with her as well. Back in the beginning, Wendi said she was attracted to Dan. They got married, and there were times that they had a happy marriage. The defense said that your parents took you and Dan on trips, and one time that was in Costa Rica, and something about a zip line. Wendi said, yes, I went zip lining while I was pregnant, and Donna kind of smiled at this. Defense points out Dan was very intelligent with 2 Harvard degrees. He did a lot of writing. He had a tenure at FSU, which takes a lot of work. He traveled to speak and was well respected by his colleagues, and Wendi agrees with all of that. And the defense says the kids became the love of his life. And after you separated, Dan made a big effort to get as much time with the kids as he could. Yes, he would Skype and you helped with that, but not necessarily the schedule he wanted. And Wendi said she tried. She's asked if Donna was kind to Dan before the separation. Yes. What about after the divorce? Yes. The defense says we've seen ugly things that she said about him, and some of the pleadings weren't attractive towards you as well. Wendi says that's true. You shared some of the things with your mom that upset you, and then she became upset and said ugly things about Dan, but she never suggested Danny deserved to be harmed or killed, and Wendi says never. The defense points out during the separation and after the divorce, sometimes Dan would call Donna for help. And if he did, she would come and help? Yes. Before you filed the petition for dissolution of marriage, what kind of experience did you have with divorce proceedings? And Wendi doesn't understand the question. The defense asked if she was familiar with family law, and Wendi says no. She has Wendi read the former husband's counter motion for enforcement of the marital settlement agreement on parenting issues and a motion for contempt and sanctions. She's asked, it doesn't say anything about a grandmother motion, does it? No. The defense. In fact, the overwhelming majority of that motion was about you and parenting issues. His complaint in that grandmother motion is him complaining that you are not meeting the requirements of the first refusal. Now, what that means in family court, that would be the parent offering the other parent the ability to care for the kids if they needed help. And Dan mentioned if you gave it, sometimes he could take it and then the boys wouldn't be with Donna. It wasn't that he was asking Donna to only have supervised visitation moving forward. Wendi said that's not how she saw it, and Donna never saw that motion according to Wendi. Now, that's kind of crazy because the grandparent motion was like an alienation of affection thing where the boys had mentioned Donna had said bad things about Dan to his kids. So I think that was a bit of a reach on that. It was pretty clear what Dan wanted. The state has referred to this bribe because there's emails that discuss offering Dan $1 million. You thought it wasn't to take the kids away from him, but rather it was in the hopes that Dan would relocate to Miami and you could still raise your kids together. There were more opportunities for Dan to practice his Jewish faith in Miami than in Tallahassee, like better restaurants that serve kosher foods. So the money wasn't a bribe, but more of an incentive for him to relocate there. And he liked it when you lived there before. Wendi says very much so, and she agrees with everything Donna's attorney said. The defense says that Dan tried to get a job at the University of Miami School of Law, but he didn't get it, and he had already been employed at FSU, so they moved back. The money Donna was talking about offering Dan would be to offset his travel if he moved to Miami, since he only taught school 2 days a week in Tallahassee, and that would give him money to take plane trips while still giving him 50-50 custody with the kids. Wendi agrees. Somewhere around October or November of 2012, you interviewed for a job in Miami, and Wendi says yes, it was with Grossman and Roth. In December of 2012, they made Wendi an offer. Wendi said what made that ideal for her is that it was more secure as opposed to grant money that could have been taken away, which would have been her job. In January, you told Dan you had the job offer. She said they went to get coffee and talk. She asked if he would consider all of them relocating to Miami, and she said he was not opposed to it, but he changed his mind. Wendi said Wendi didn't change hers, and she filed the relocation motion, and she also amended her dissolution of marriage to include relocation. In June of 2013, just before the divorce is final, you had the relocation hearing and you were denied. You were able to work out a schedule for summer and you ended up settling the divorce. Did you always want the kids to be a big part of Dan's life? Yes. They bring in an email from Harvey about the TV appointment on the day of Dan's murder. The order creation date for that was July 11th, 2014. Harvey called the Geek Squad saying there were problems with the screen. They go through a lot of questions Harvey had to answer, and one of those was, would you be willing to accept an earlier appointment if one's available? And Harvey chose yes. They move on to the name change, and the defense points out it was officially changed a year after the murder. She says you went to Miami, and your oldest was going to kindergarten. The youngest was going to a preschool program, and you registered them with the last name Markel. But because you were going to socially refer to them as Adelson, you asked the school to refer to them as Adelson. When you went to orientation, did his little nameplate say Adelson? Wendi doesn't remember. But you asked that he be called Adelson, and Wendi says yes. The defense reminds Wendi she was shown that exhibit where Donna had registered the boy as Adelson. The defense essentially has Wendi say that's why Donna referred to him as Adelson, because Wendi was doing that socially. And the same with the email about Harvey referring to Lincoln as Adelson. Wendi explains Tot Shabbat. It's a Sabbath activity where the grandparents would come with the kids to sing songs. Wendi says she thought the name Adelson would make them safer. You were asked about buying a home, and it was suggested Charlie convinced you not to. And you said it was because you had not gotten your settlement from Dan. Wendi said that's correct, and that meant she didn't have the money to buy the house. The defense says Donna's making a lot of suggestions, like telling Dan you're going to raise the kids as Catholics, but she wasn't suggesting you do it, but more as a means of negotiating. Wendi said that was her understanding. You said your mom hated Dan before his murder, but a week before, she was babysitting for him and made him banana bread without nuts, but with chocolate chips. Is there a difference between being mad and hating someone? Wendi says yes. She brings up the prosecution saying that Wendi would not have left without her brother and mom suggesting it. Wendi says, I wouldn't have had the strength to leave on my own. The defense asks if after her school year was over at FSU, she would go to Coral Springs or Miami and spend 2 weeks with Donna and Harvey together with Dan, and then with the kids when they came along. Wendi says yes. Summer of 2012 is when you decided to leave him. Dan was there, and the kids too, and you and your mom went out for coffee, and that's when you told her you were going to leave Dan. Did Donna suggest counseling? Wendi said they had been in counseling and it didn't work, but she does not remember going for coffee with Donna. The defense talks about the questions with law enforcement the day Dan was shot. They pointed out things you said about your family. When you were interviewed, you said Dan's parents are going to think you're the one who did it, and Wendi says yes. Regarding relocation, June 18th, 2013, there was a hearing. And prior to that, you told your mom that since she would be testifying in court, she would need to wait outside. Wendi doesn't remember. So she has Wendi read from the transcript, and it says, because you're testifying in court, you won't be able to sit in the hearing with me. Moving back just a bit, April of 2013, you took a trip with a man named Miguel because you were speaking at a conference. Wendi doesn't remember the trip, but says she was seeing somebody named Miguel. She's reminded that trip was to Puerto Rico, and the defense gives her documents to look over. There was an email written April 28th, 2013 to Renee. This is when you're coming back from your trip, and your parents had the boys while you were gone. You have bullet points about what you want to do to resolve your divorce. Is that correct? Wendi said not just that, but how I want to live my life overall. So the defense refers to the last bullet point. It says, I've been coming to a place in the last few months where I realize I want to keep my job. It allows me maximum flexibility to spend time with my kids while allowing the freedom for intellectual exploration, one-on-one mentoring with students, and meaningful work in the community. I don't care that derogatory name for Dan said I stole from him and that I'm mentally ill. Nasty things are said in divorces, and people know that. Tallahassee isn't where I ever wanted to live, but it's where my job is, and it's where the boy's father is. And that means they aren't constantly flying on planes or driving in cars to accomplish our custody situation. The defense says you have the petition for relocation, but you're starting to think Tallahassee is where you need to be, and Wendi says yes. They bring up an email from May 2nd of 2013, and in the email, Wendi says she loves sitting in on graduation, but Dan usually doesn't because he's typically at synagogue. In the email, you say it's on Sunday this year, and I have the boys, but the dean wants all faculty to attend so mom can watch my boys. Was it routine for you to get their help if you needed it? Yes. Another email, June 4th, 2013 to Renee. It's close to the relocation hearing that was taking place on June 18th. And you say concerns about what you've been through in the divorce, but Dan sent a long message about how they could do things differently. Talk about their vision for the boys' future, and you agreed you want to do it peacefully. Wendi says yes. So you call Gary, the partner who offered you the job in Miami, to come testify at this relocation hearing? Yes. But one thing you say is, I've changed my mind. And the defense points out you could have called Charlie and say, I'm going to stay in Tallahassee. I hope one day you'll understand, and you could say the same to your parents and tell them they are free to come visit anytime. Wendi says yes, could have done that. The next page is the alternative, which is to have Gary testify. Your mom's going to testify, and you thought the hearing was going to be 1 or 2 days, and you acknowledge it's going to cost more money, it's going to be more stress. And you say, to save face with my family and be given an opportunity that I don't want, which is to live with them in South Florida. But you say, I'm willing to put myself through all this just to keep up appearances that I want to live in South Florida, even though I don't want to. Wendi says, yeah. And you say it would be giving up my flexible job that allows me to spend more time with my kids. Yes. The defense says you chose the second alternative. Wendi said, I went through with the hearing. She's handed a transcript. Gary testified, you testified, and then the judge called a timeout. Wendi doesn't remember that, but the judge made some comments that the kids had not been harmed with Dan, and since he had not pulled out their toenails, it seemed like the judge was leaning towards no. Wendi says that's correct. The defense says, but you didn't call all of your witnesses. Your mom stayed outside with your dad during the testimony. Wendi said, I asked her to because if she was going to testify, she needed to stay outside. But then you came outside and said it was denied, and Wendi says yes. The defense points out it was after the denial when those emails that got ugly were written. Yes. She's asked if relocation was ever an issue again, and Wendi says no. That was the end of discussion about relocation, and there were no more plans about how to get relocation. It had been decided. The defense points out that this denial is with prejudice, meaning it's over, cannot be revisited. In other words, Wendi would not be able to leave Tallahassee until those boys turned 18, and that's it. Couldn't bring it back to court. The defense says before that, it says, as such, both parties stipulate to this, and Wendi agrees. The defense says, but you didn't tell your parents that you stipulated to this, and Wendi doesn't think so. The defense says, so your mom thought you still had a chance to get it, and she kept writing all of these ugly emails. But if you had told her that you stipulated, that would have been the end of it. And Wendi says, I don't know if it would be the end. That would be guessing. The defense says after July 31st, she didn't write any more emails, and Wendi doesn't know. You said mom hated Dan at the time he was killed, but you clarified she was mad. But you testified that you hated Dan. Wendi doesn't remember saying that. There is a sidebar. They end up taking a break. When they come back, they're reading from something Wendi wrote, talking about her wedding day. It was like being an actor on someone else's show. The defense says you knew on your honeymoon. You said you were enjoying the vacation, but you weren't sure you liked him, let alone loved him. I was eager to start a life with someone, and he was with me. Wendi doesn't remember that. The defense, your boys lost their father on the day he was murdered. They're growing up, and 11 years has passed without any of his influence. He's not here to give them advice, come to any of their functions. They're not eating kosher because on July 18th, he was brutally murdered. And you testified anyone in your family who had anything to do with this murder should be held responsible. Is that correct? Wendi says yes. Defense. And that includes you, doesn't it? Wendi says anyone who's responsible. And that was the end of cross. And can I just say, Donna's attorney brought it right there. That was a mic drop moment. So very clear here. Donna doesn't mind throwing Wendi under the bus. Y'all, I cannot wait for Charlie to get on that stand because she threw him under the bus in openings. You know Charlie's heard about that. So Charlie has an appeal that he's trying to get, and we all know the chances of that likely slim to none. Does Charlie play it safe, or is Charlie going to get bitter and just go after his mom? I can't wait for the day he takes the stand. Moving on to redirect. Prosecutor Kappelman, when you said you felt like an actor in someone else's show, whose show was it? Wendi said she felt she wasn't present in her own life because she is a people pleaser. She's always tried to make others happy. Prosecutor says, including your mom, and that's why you kept going with the relocation. Wendi says that's part of her reason. You were asked on cross about stipulating with prejudice. Do you remember doing that? Wendi says she doesn't remember actively stipulating. The prosecutor points out you have previously said you did not know what with prejudice meant. Just a reminder, Wendi is an attorney, but Wendi says she does not use that in her daily practice, and at the time she forgot that with prejudice meant it was a final order, over and done. Oh boy. On cross, they said your mom was not told about the stipulation and she was misled. But they bring in a document, and the email is from Donna and Harvey's email to a friend of theirs and is signed Love Donna, so we know Donna sent it. And in the email, Donna indicates there is no chance at the appellate level for relocation. Wendi agrees. Is that dated June 25th of 2013? Yes. 5 days after your mom knew that order was final. And we know that based on this email, Wendi says yes. Your mom never suggested harm to Dan, but she wanted to bribe him, take control from him, aggravate him, scare him, give him some grief, take something from him, show that effer what would make him absolutely miserable, right? But definitely not kill him. Wendi says, I don't know what the question is. And the prosecutor says Donna was caring and devoted to your boys, and maybe she cared a little too much about your life and what was going on. Wendi says, I don't know that you can care too much, Prosecutor Kappelman. So her Nazi uniform idea, that came from a place of love. Would you agree with that? And Wendi says yes. Prosecutor said her lawyers are trying to downplay this, but she looked into having those boys baptized and could do it within 2 weeks. She justified it would be harmless to your kids because it's like playing dress up like Jake the Pirate. Wendi says yes. She thought the ends would justify the means, and a move to South Florida was best for you and your kids, who she cared about more than anyone in the world. Wendi says, I don't know who she cares about more, but maybe my dad. Prosecution says the kids were going to have better support. Mom has a more lucrative job, and your lives depended on it. Isn't that what she said? Yes. The defense said Dan could have moved, right? Yes. He could have enjoyed all that delicious kosher food in South Florida. And if he did, you could have happily co-parented the boys, but he just wouldn't relent, would he? Wendi said, we had a hearing, and the judge said no. Prosecutor says he wouldn't give your mom what she wanted. Wendi said her and Dan only had one conversation about it. It was not an ongoing thing that they talked about. You were asked on cross if you thought things would have been great for Dan in Miami. Wendi says it would have been, but he wouldn't agree. And that was the end of redirect. So after Wendi was her older brother, Rob Adelson. So once he's sworn in, they go through the siblings and the order. He's the oldest. Charlie's the middle, Wendy's the youngest. He said Donna is more controlling, where Harvey is more passive. Donna was a very involved parent when they were growing up, but she had these fixed ideas of things she wanted to happen in her children's lives. And if they didn't do those things, it wasn't acceptable. If you went along with her, things were fine. And if you didn't, things were not fine. She had very strong feelings about their occupations and who they married. He said that's one of the reasons he became a doctor. After everybody grew up and Wendi and Rob got married and had kids of their own, she was more involved with Wendi and then a lesser degree to Charlie at that point, and even lesser involved with him. He said it was not a healthy level of involvement, over-involved and more on the controlling side. Charlie always needed more attention than he or Wendi did. When Wendi left Dan, he didn't know there were any problems until after she left him. And then Donna's focus shifted to Wendi. He said Charlie was dependent on Donna to organize things with the dental practice. And he does remember growing up that Donna would be writing checks on their kitchen table, just keeping up with the practice. Harvey sold the business to Charlie around 2012, and then Charlie sold it back to Harvey sometime between the winter of 2015 into 2016. Donna is the kind of person who would have questions if you want her to do something. She wouldn't just blindly do things. At first, Donna was very positive about Dan when he and Wendi got together, but that changed as the relationship headed towards divorce. He only heard bad things about Dan after Wendi moved out, but never before. In 2013, he said Donna hated Dan based on things Donna would say to him. He also said Wendi would play the damsel in distress during her divorce. Donna did talk to Rob about the divorce some, and the phrase that sticks out in his head the most is Dan is depoting Wendi to death. There were also complaints about mediations and depositions that Wendi had to go through. So they go into Donna explaining to him about how they planned for Wendi to leave Dan. Donna had been in Tallahassee for several months, looking for a place to rent for Wendi, moving money around, and getting things set up. Donna told him this all at once, just days after Wendi left Dan. And she told him rather gleefully that she was pleased that she and Wendi timed the phone call where Wendi told Dan she was leaving him to just before Dan was going to get on stage to give his speech. In order to hide that they were renting a place, they used Donna's maiden name, so there wouldn't be an Adelson in Tallahassee for word to get around. Donna was looking over Wendi's motions, and she did that when they were visiting at one point. They were in his house, getting ready to go to the hospital, I believe for the birth of one of his daughters, and Donna came to visit. She wanted the Wi-Fi because she was going over emails to help with the divorce. He said this would have been in October of 2012. Donna told him Wendi was trying to get permission to move to Miami and also about the $1 million bribe. In the year or two after Wendi left Dan, Donna said Wendi needed her help and she was up in Tallahassee a lot. He said from their conversations, Donna cared more about Wendi's divorce than anybody. He said Charlie, he cares about go-karts, jet skis, boats, going out, but not Wendi's divorce. He said Donna is very into her grandkids and their success, but he doesn't think Wendi moving to Miami was more important to Charlie than it was to Donna. Donna was fixated on Wendi taking a job with Gary in Miami, and it came up a lot in his discussions with Donna. She said Wendi would make $1 million a year and be a partner. The only time he heard any anger from Donna after the murder was when he asked if Wendi would go to work for Gary, but the job didn't work out because his partners wouldn't let him hire Wendi after the murder. In the summer of 2014, towards the end of June, Wendi sent Rob a text referencing having a boyfriend, and that would have been before Dan's murder. He said it was very unusual because Wendi would never share anything about her relationships with him, and his impression was that his parents did not know about this relationship. In the text, Wendi said she was going to Gainesville for the weekend, and Rob had lived there 3 years prior, and so he asked Wendi, who is this Jeff guy? And Wendi said her boyfriend. She even sent pictures of her and Jeff with her boys at Wakulla Springs. After the murder, he felt compelled to tell law enforcement about Jeff, and he showed them the photos. He said 2 or 3 weeks before the murder, July 5th, 2014, Harvey turned 70, and they had this big party at the condo in Miami. There was an email saying that your dad doesn't want gifts, he just wants to be with all of his kids for his birthday. And Rob said Harvey really was not into gifts. He said if a gift is going to be given to anybody, Donna would say, here's the gift, and here's what you owe if you want to be a part of it. He said the place they lived in Miami was very secure. They had celebrities that lived in there, and he remembered that A-Rod from the Yankees was one. He thinks they had been living there around 6 or so months. They were just trying it out to see if they liked living in South Beach. He said to him it seemed like they were there full time, but still had the house in Coral Springs. Charlie and Wendi were at the party, as well as Wendi and Dan's boys. He said they had a caterer and a chef on the balcony. He first heard about Dan's murder the day after, on July 19th. He was in Chicago for a meeting, and at first he got a phone call. He picked up, asked to call back later. Then he got a text that said, "Tragedy here, please call," and it was from Donna. So he called and he said he will remember that forever. Donna said, just want to let you know, Danny's been shot and he didn't make it. They were driving up to Tallahassee to help Wendi and said they really couldn't talk further. He said his mom wasn't crying. She was just very matter of fact. The only other time he talked to her that weekend was the next day when he was in the airport going home. Donna told him that someone went to the front door and asked, "Are you Dan Markell?" He said yes, and they shot him. Rob says, "How do you know that?" Donna said, "Well, that's what they're telling us." But he said he knew there was only one way to hear that story, and it bothered him. And later he found out that that story wasn't true. He also pointed out during that conversation, again, she wasn't crying. Law enforcement came back to his house. He was at work, so they talked to his wife. And he later talked to them at his office the next day. After the interview with the FBI, he said it was that afternoon, maybe the next day, Donna called and said, if the police come around, don't talk to them. He told her he already had, and she said, you don't know anything anyway. And he said that was unusual. He said he's not going to not talk to the FBI if they show up to his house. He said after the murder, Donna did not seem curious about who killed Dan. In fact, none of them seemed curious. He asked Donna what she thought happened, and those conversations were always rerouted or discouraged. But around mid-August, he asked, what is going on? This case is getting notoriety. It's all over the news. So he wanted to know what they thought happened. Donna said, I don't know. Don't care. He said, this was an unsolved murder of my brother-in-law. There was national interest and nobody had curiosity about who killed Dan. But his murder was not a subject to be discussed. Fast forward to 2016 when Sigfredo and Rivera were arrested. Somebody told him about it in the doctor's lounge. He asked his wife, should we call mom and dad? Their anniversary was coming up 2 days after he found out, so they thought they would wait and see if they reached out. He thought maybe they're stressed. And just like he thought, on the 28th, Donna called. But she didn't mention a thing about the arrest. She wished Rob and his wife well. They had small talk, and he said he kind of let it go for a bit in the conversation, but he said, this is not small news. And he finally said to Donna, hey, they arrested someone. No response. He said it 2 or 3 times, and Donna said, I've got to go. She hung up, and they never talked about it again after that. Not sure if he meant they never talked again or just about the arrest or the murder in general. On Cross, in 2012 to 2014, how many times did you visit your family in South Florida? He said October of 2012 was when his daughter was born. So 2013, Thanksgivings were typically the times they would travel with a 1 and a 3-year-old, and also for Harvey's birthday. He definitely knows of 2 times and maybe 1 other time. The defense points out that Rob would come into town, stay a couple of days and leave, well, because he's a doctor and had a job. As far as phone calls, Rob said maybe every other week. He was there for Harvey's birthday on the 5th, and he left the 6th. Dan was killed July 18th, and the defense asked, when did you come to town to be with your family? And Rob says, I didn't. You said your mom called and said you should not talk to the police. But what happened is a family friend, Mr. Weinstein, he called and advised the family shouldn't talk to police, and Rob says yes. And that was the end of Cross. There was no redirect. So I really just think that Rob came across as very credible. I also think that him describing how his mother was, also her coldness after the murder, no interest in who killed their ex-son-in-law, the father of their grandkids, nothing. I think it's going to be very impactful on that jury. Even though he wasn't on the stand, a fraction of what Wendi was today, very powerful in what he did. And bless his heart, he seems very, very tortured, as you could imagine. We will see what happens tomorrow, but that is it for this episode. Hope you guys have a good morning, and we will see you soon.